The great hall of the Hegemony Council stretched across the sky like a glass mountain, floating high above the swirling clouds of Volta Prime. The crystalline towers caught the light of 3 suns and threw rainbow patterns across the polished floors. Inside this monument to galactic power, the rulers of 47 star systems gathered to discuss a problem that should not have existed. Admiral Korath stood before the council, his obsidian scales catching the light as he shifted his massive frame. The Drachnari had served as the Hegemony's enforcers for 3,000 years, and never in that time had he been forced to deliver such disturbing news. His yellow eyes scanned the assembled representatives as he began his report. Council members, we have lost contact with 6 Outer Rim systems in the past month, he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed through the chamber. Their tribute fleets have failed to arrive. Our communication beacons have gone silent. Our scout ships have found nothing but empty space where our outposts should be. Council leader Vorthok leaned forward in his floating throne, his pale blue skin almost translucent in the artificial light. The ancient being had ruled the hegemony for over 800 years, and his patience for failure had worn thin, long. Go, explain this incompetence, Admiral. How do entire systems simply disappear? Korath activated a holographic display that filled the center of the hall. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, with red markers indicating the missing systems. All of them formed a rough circle around one small, unremarkable star system on the outer edge of known space. All the missing systems share one common factor, Korath continued. They were the closest to the system here. He pointed to a tiny yellow star surrounded by several small planets. The local inhabitants call it Sol. The 3rd planet from their star is called Earth. A ripple of laughter passed through the council. Counselor Nethes, her insectoid features twitching with amusement, spoke up from her position near the back of the hall. You're suggesting that this primitive world is responsible for the disappearance of our fleets? Our scouts have observed them for decades. They can barely reach their own moon with their crude chemical rockets. Vorthak's expression remained cold as ice. Show us what we know about these humans. The holographic display shifted to show images of Earth. Blue oceans, green continents, swirling white clouds. Cities filled with lights, highways crawling with primitive vehicles, and most amusing of all, their laughably simple spacecraft. The assembled council members watched footage of human rockets exploding on launch pads, of their clumsy attempts at space exploration, of their primitive nuclear weapons that could barely crack a moon's surface. As you can see, Korath said, though his voice carried less certainty than before, they appear to be in the early stages of technological development. Their most advanced weapons are crude fusion devices. Their ships use chemical propulsion. They have no understanding of quantum energy manipulation or gravitational field generation. And how? Vorthak's voice cut through the air like a blade. Do you explain 6 missing fleets? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Admiral Korath had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. The missing ships represented millions of tons of the most advanced military hardware in the galaxy. Each fleet contained enough firepower to glass a planet's surface in hours. They simply could not vanish without a trace. Perhaps, offered Counselor Zek from his position near the environmental controls, these humans have found ancient technology. Left by a previous civilization, there are legends of lost races that once traveled between the stars. Vorthak's laugh was like breaking glass. Ancient technology, look at them. The display zoomed in on a human city, showing people walking on sidewalks, driving their primitive vehicles, living their simple lives. They don't even have artificial gravity. They use fossil fuels for energy. Their most advanced computers are barely capable of basic calculations. But far below the hegemony's crystalline towers, in the depths of space between the stars, the truth was far different from what their scouts had reported. Hidden monitoring stations throughout the Sol. The system had been tracking every hegemony ship that entered their territory for the past 18 months. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in facilities that no alien scanner had detected, thousands of humans worked around the clock on projects that would have terrified the Council if they had known about them. Dr. Lisa Parks stood in the main control room of Luna Base 7, watching data streams flow across dozens of screens. The facility had been built in complete secrecy over the past 5 years, using technology that humanity had been quietly developing since their first contact with alien visitors decades earlier. The hegemony thought they were watching a primitive species fumble its way into space. They had no idea that humanity had been watching them back. "Status report on the outer perimeter sensors," she called to the technician at the communication station. "All stations reporting green, Doctor. We have full coverage from the asteroid belt to the edge of the system. The moment any hegemony ship crosses our boundary, we'll know about it." Park nodded and moved to the tactical display. The screen showed the positions of over 3,000 modified ships hidden throughout the solar system. To outside observers, they looked like routine mining vessels, cargo haulers, and research platforms. In reality, each one had been carefully converted into a weapon of war using a combination of human engineering and reverse-engineered alien technology. That the conversion process had taken years and the cooperation of every spacefaring nation on Earth. When humanity's governments finally accepted that first contact with aliens would not be peaceful, they had put aside their differences and worked together on the largest secret project in human history. The Terra Defense Initiative had built not just weapons, but an entire hidden infrastructure designed for one purpose: to make any invasion of the Sol system so costly that the attackers would wish they had never heard of Earth. Dr. Park called another technician from across the room. "We're receiving updates from the deep space stations. Hegemony fleet movements suggest they're planning something big. Admiral patterns indicate a major deployment is being prepared." Jaw tightened. They had known this day would come. The missing hegemony fleets had not simply vanished. They had been eliminated by precise human strikes designed to look like accidents or system failures. Equipment malfunctions, navigation errors that sent ships into asteroid fields, power core explosions that left no traces. Each incident had been carefully planned to avoid detection, but they had known that eventually the hegemony would realize what was happening. "Begin implementation of Defense Protocol 7, she ordered. "Send coded messages to all station commanders. The enemy is coming, and we need to be ready." Meanwhile, back on Volta Prime, the Council was reaching its own conclusions. Admiral Korath had presented his final analysis, and the result was exactly what humanity had expected. The hegemony's arrogance would be their downfall. "The evidence suggests system failures and navigational errors," Korath concluded. "Our ships are operating at the edge of known space, far from support facilities. It's possible that the stress of long-range operations has led to more equipment failures than usual." Vorthok seemed satisfied with this explanation. "Nevertheless, we cannot allow any disruption to our tribute collection. I'm authorizing the deployment of Battlefleet Omega to establish a permanent presence in this region. These humans may be primitive, but their system appears to contain valuable resources. It's time we added them to our empire." The council members murmured their approval. Battlefleet Omega was one of their most powerful formations, containing over 200 warships, including 3 massive dreadnoughts. It's more than enough to handle whatever primitive resistance these humans might offer. Admiral Korath Vorthok continued, "You will personally lead this operation. Establish orbital control over their homeworld. Assess their population for potential slave labor. Begin mining operations on their asteroid belt and outer planets. If they resist, make an example of their largest population centers." Korath bowed his massive head. "It will be done, Council Leader. These humans will learn their place in the natural order, just as all primitive species must." As the council session ended and the representatives began to disperse, none of them noticed the small communication device hidden within the decorative elements of the Great Hall. The device had been broadcasting their entire conversation to a listening post 17 light-years away where human intelligence officers recorded every word. Within hours, the complete details of Battlefleet Omega's deployment would be in the hands of Dr. Park and her team. The hegemony was finally coming to Earth in force, just as humanity had been preparing for. They thought they were facing primitives with chemical rockets and crude nuclear weapons. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest advantage was not their technology, but their willingness to do whatever it took to remain free. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy through superior firepower and overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that was willing to turn every ship, every asteroid, every grain of space dust into a weapon. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now all that remained was to show these galactic bullies what happened when they picked a fight with the wrong species. Battle Fleet Omega dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a storm front moving across a peaceful sky. 237 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark metal that had conquered 1,000 worlds. At the center of the fleet, the dreadnought Eternal Dominion stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its weapon arrays capable of cracking a planet's crust. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical displays with satisfaction. The primitive system spread out before them like a collection of toys. The small, rocky planets hugged close to their yellow star, while the gas giants lounged in the outer orbits like sleeping beasts. Between them, the asteroid belt sparkled, with the promise of mineral wealth that would soon belong to the hegemony. "Sensors report no defensive installations," announced his tactical officer, a young Drachnari named Vex. "The asteroid belt shows signs of mining activity, but nothing more than basic extraction operations. We're detecting approximately 3,000 vessels throughout the system, but they appear to be civilian craft." Korath nodded, his yellow eyes scanning the readouts. As expected, these humans barely understand the principles of space travel. "Begin standard occupation protocol. Advance scouts to establish orbital control over the third planet. Mining teams to begin survey operations in the asteroid belt. We'll have this system pacified within a solar day." The first wave of hegemony ships moved forward with the confidence of a predator approaching wounded prey. 12 heavy cruisers and their escort fighters headed toward Earth, while another formation peeled off toward the asteroid belt. It was a routine operation, no different from the dozens of primitive worlds they had conquered over the centuries. But in the depths of the asteroid belt, Captain Rodriguez was watching their approach with grim satisfaction. His converted cargo freighter, the New Horizon, looked like nothing more than a battered mining vessel from the outside. Inside, however, it carried enough nuclear warheads to level a small city. More importantly, it carried something the hegemony had never encountered: a human crew that knew they were probably going to die and had made peace with that fact. "All stations, this is Control," came the voice of Dr. Park through the encrypted communication channel. "Enemy forces are moving into position. Execute Defense Plan Alpha. Remember, we only get one chance at this." Rodriguez keyed his microphone. "New Horizon, acknowledging. Beginning attack run on target designation Bravo 7. He looked around at his crew of volunteers, men and women who had left families behind to be here. "Y'all know what this means? I'm not coming back from this one. But we're going to make sure these alien bastards remember the day they decided to mess with Earth." The bridge crew nodded grimly. They had trained for this moment for 2 years, running simulations and practicing their roles until they could execute the plan in their sleep. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Get close enough to the enemy ships to ram them, then detonate their nuclear cargo to take out as many aliens as possible. "Helm, take us in," Rodriguez ordered. "Make it look like we're running scared. I want them to think we're just another panicked mining crew trying to get away." The New Horizon began moving toward the advancing hegemony formation, its engines stuttering and sparking as if damaged. On the Drachnari ships, sensor operators watched the approaching vessel with mild interest, another frightened primitive trying to flee the inevitable. But throughout the asteroid belt, similar scenes were playing out. Dozens of converted human ships were beginning their final approaches, each one carrying crews that had volunteered for what they knew was a suicide mission. The hegemony had never faced an enemy that was willing to die to hurt them, and they had no idea what was coming. "Sir," Dex reported from his position at the tactical station aboard the Eternal Dominion. "We're detecting some unusual movement patterns among the civilian vessels. Several ships appear to be converging on our advanced formations." Korath glanced at the display, but saw nothing alarming, probably trying to surrender. These primitives likely realized the futility of resistance. Order the advanced teams to accept any surrender attempts, but maintain formation. The first indication that something was wrong came when the New Horizon suddenly accelerated directly toward the hegemony cruiser Vengeance of Drachnos. The massive alien warship, nearly 10 times the size of the human vessel, didn't even bother to take evasive action. Their shields could easily deflect such a primitive attack. "Sir," called the communications officer aboard the Vengeance. "The approaching vessel is not responding to our surrender demands. They appear to be on a collision course." The Draconary captain laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Let them come. Their primitive hull will barely scratch our shields. Perhaps watching their ship disintegrate will convince the others to be more reasonable." The New Horizon struck the hegemony cruiser's shields at nearly maximum velocity, and for a moment it seemed like the alien captain was right. The human ship crumpled like paper against the invisible barrier, its hull breaking apart under the tremendous forces. But then something happened that the hegemony had never seen before. The nuclear warheads aboard the New Horizon detonated simultaneously, creating a brief star in the darkness of space. The explosion was not large by stellar standards, but it was perfectly positioned and timed. The concentrated energy overloaded the cruiser's shield generators, and the secondary blast wave tore through the ship's hull like tissue paper. The Vengeance of Drachnos, a vessel that had conquered dozens of worlds and never suffered more than minor damage, broke apart in a cascade of explosions that lit up the asteroid belt like a fireworks display. Captain Rodriguez and his crew were gone, but they had taken 800 alien warriors with them. "What in the void just happened?" Korath roared, his calm composure shattered. "How did a primitive cargo vessel destroy a heavy cruiser before?" Anyone could answer. The tactical display lit up with new contacts. Throughout the asteroid belt, human ships were accelerating toward the hegemony formation. But these weren't panicked civilians trying to flee. They were moving with purpose. Their trajectories calculated to bring them into collision with the alien vessels. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Korath shouted into his communicator. "These humans are using suicide tactics. Do not let them get close." But the warning came too late. The human ships had been positioned throughout the asteroid belt for months, waiting for this moment. They knew exactly where the hegemony ships would be, and they had planned their attacks down to the second. Within minutes, a dozen more alien vessels were burning wrecks. Their crews dead or dying in the cold vacuum of space. The hegemony forces, trained for conventional warfare between civilized species, found themselves facing an enemy that fought. Like wild animals, humans showed no concern for their own survival, no regard for the accepted rules of engagement. They turned their own ships into weapons, their crews into ammunition. Major Thompson, commanding the ground-based missile defense systems, watched the battle from his bunker beneath the Colorado mountains. The hidden silos around the world were opening, launching their payloads not at the alien ships, but at carefully calculated points in space. The missiles weren't designed to destroy the enemy directly. Instead, they were creating fields of debris and electromagnetic interference that would disrupt the hegemony's advanced targeting systems. "Fire mission Alpha 7 complete," reported one of his technicians. "Debris field established in sectors 12 through 18. Enemy targeting efficiency down 30%. Right. Thompson nodded grimly. The strategy was working, but the cost was terrible. Each human ship that died in the asteroid belt represented dozens of volunteers who would never see their families again. But their sacrifice was buying Earth something precious: time and confusion. The hegemony fleet, designed to fight against opponents who valued their own lives, was struggling to adapt to an enemy that seemed to welcome death. Their advanced shields and armor were useless against attacks that they couldn't see coming. Their sophisticated tactics were meaningless against opponents who were willing to die to hurt them. Sir Thex reported, his voice shaking, "We've lost 18 ships in the past hour. The humans are using some kind of coordinated attack pattern. They're turning their entire civilian fleet into a weapon." Korath stared at the tactical display, watching red markers disappear one by one as his ships were destroyed by an enemy. He had dismissed as primitive. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. Recall all advanced formations. He ordered to establish defensive perimeter around the fleet. Launch all fighters to intercept incoming threats. As he gave the orders, Korath knew that something fundamental had changed. In 3,000 years of conquest, the hegemony had never faced an enemy like this. They had built their empire on the assumption that all intelligent species would eventually submit rather than face total destruction. The humans were proving that assumption wrong in the most violent way possible. Throughout the Sol system, the pattern was repeating. Human mining ships rammed hegemony scouts. Converted cargo vessels loaded with explosives crashed into alien supply ships. Even the smallest human craft were being used as weapons, their crews steering them into collision courses with their enemies before detonating whatever explosive devices they could cobble together. The psychological impact was even more devastating than the physical damage. Hegemony crews, trained to believe in their own superiority, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to acknowledge that superiority. The humans weren't just fighting, they were fighting with joy, with fierce determination, with the absolute certainty that death was preferable to slavery. Dr. Park, watching the battle from Luna Base 7, felt her heart breaking as she watched. The casualty reports stream in. Thousands of brave men and women were dying to protect their world. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The mighty hegemony fleet was being torn apart by an enemy they had never imagined could exist. Phase 2 is ready to begin, reported her tactical coordinator. The fleet is still in position, but they're starting to adapt to our tactics. Park nodded. The suicide attacks had been devastating, but they couldn't last forever. The humans were running out of ships and volunteers. It was time to move to the next phase of the defense plan. Begin Phase 2, she ordered. Let's show them what happens when they threaten our home. A real battle for Earth was about to begin. The news of the Sol System battle spread through. The hegemony's empire, like poison in the water supply. For 3,000 years, their fleets had been invincible. Entire civilizations had surrendered at the first sight of their dark ships appearing in their skies. Now, for the first time in recorded history, a hegemony battle fleet had been not just defeated, but completely destroyed by a species that barely understood space travel. On the mining world of Korath Prime, insectoid Hivari workers stopped their excavation operations to watch the emergency broadcasts. The official hegemony news channels claimed it was a minor setback, equipment failures, and navigation errors that had nothing to do with the primitive humans. But the underground communication networks told a different story. They whispered about the mad species that had turned their entire civilization into a weapon. About ships crashing into hegemony cruisers with nuclear fire. About an enemy that chose death over surrender, Admiral Korath's replacement. A scarred veteran named Vex stood in the ruins of the Eternal Dominion's bridge and tried to make sense of what had happened. The massive dreadnought had survived the battle, but barely. Half the ship's systems were offline, and the hull bore the scars of dozens of human attack runs. Most of his fleet was gone, reduced to glowing debris drifting through the asteroid belt. Status report, he growled too. His surviving officers? 87 ships destroyed, 43 damaged beyond immediate repair, came the reply from his tactical officer. Estimated human losses are over 2,000 vessels, but the officer hesitated. But what? Sir Intelligence suggests. They're already building more. Earth-based manufacturing has increased by 300% since the battle began. They're converting every available ship, every piece of industrial equipment, into weapons. Vex studied the tactical display, showing the inner solar system. Earth hung there like a blue jewel, seemingly defenseless now that its improvised fleet had been destroyed. But something about the planet's calm appearance bothered him. The humans had been too well prepared to coordinate it in their attack. This wasn't the desperate last stand of a primitive species. This was part of a larger plan. Begin orbital bombardment of the major population centers, he ordered. We'll make an example of this world that will prevent any other species from getting similar ideas. But even as he gave the order, Vex knew that something had changed in the galaxy. The hegemony's reputation for invincibility had been shattered. Even if they reduced Earth to radioactive ash, the damage was already done. Other species had seen that the mighty hegemony could bleed. On Earth itself, the aftermath of the space battle was devastating. Entire cities had been evacuated as orbital. Debris rained down from the destroyed ships. The combined nuclear explosions in the asteroid belt had created electromagnetic pulses that knocked out power grids across half the planet. But in the underground bunkers and hidden facilities, humanity's leaders were already planning their next move. General Martinez stood before a table covered with tactical displays and communication equipment. The unified Earth's defense force had been preparing for this moment for years. And despite the terrible cost of the space battle, everything was proceeding according to plan. Status report from all sectors, he ordered. Phase 2 installations are online and ready, reported Colonel Adams from the North American defense sector. Hidden missile batteries are operational. Ground-based defense systems are at full readiness. European sector reports similar status, added Commander Blake. The underground manufacturing facilities are operating at maximum capacity. We should have the first batch of new ships ready within 72 hours. Martinez nodded grimly. The space battle had been designed to accomplish two goals: destroy as much of the hegemony fleet as possible, make them underestimate what humanity was still capable of. The aliens thought they had faced Earth's entire military capability. They had no idea that the real war was just beginning. Dr. Park's research team had been working around the clock since the battle ended, analyzing captured hegemony technology and developing new weapons based on what they had learned. The breakthrough had come when they discovered that the aliens' energy shields, while incredibly powerful, operated on a specific frequency that could be disrupted by carefully modulated electromagnetic pulses. The shield-breaker missiles are ready for field testing, she reported to General Martinez via encrypted communication. If our calculations are correct, they should be able to penetrate even their Dreadnought-class defenses. How many do we have? Currently about 50? The new manufacturing facilities should be able to produce them much faster now that we have the design finalized. Martinez studied the tactical situation. 50 missiles weren't enough to destroy the remaining hegemony fleet, but they might be enough for something more important, proving that humanity could hurt them anywhere. Anytime. The first human counterattack began not with a grand fleet engagement, but with a single, modified cargo ship approaching the hegemony's nearest stronghold. The vessel appeared to be a damaged refugee ship, its hull scorched and its engines sputtering. Its distress beacon claimed that it was carrying survivors from the Earth's battle. Seeking asylum from the victorious hegemony forces, Commander Williams, piloting the disguised ship, spent months studying captured alien technology and learning their languages. His team of 12 volunteers had been trained in alien culture, technology, and military procedures. To any outside observer, they appeared to be defeated humans seeking mercy from their conquerors. The hegemony base commander, confident in his superiority and eager to interrogate the survivors of the Earth battle, allowed the ship to dock. The humans were processed through standard detention procedures. Their ships searched for weapons and contraband. The aliens found nothing suspicious, because there was nothing to find. The real weapon wasn't a bomb or a missile. It was information. Williams and his team had brought with them a computer virus specifically designed to infiltrate hegemony communication networks.
Oh.
The virus was hidden in the ship's navigation computer, disguised as routine star chart data. When the hegemony technicians downloaded the ship's logs for analysis, they unknowingly introduced the virus into their base's computer system. The virus was unlike anything the hegemony had ever encountered. Instead of simply destroying data or disrupting systems, it was designed to learn and adapt. It studied their communication protocols, their command structures, their operational procedures. Then it began to spread. Within hours, the virus had reached the hegemony's main communication hub for the sector. From there, it jumped to military command centers, supply depots, and fleet coordination systems. But its most insidious feature was yet to be revealed. Along with mapping their networks and stealing their operational data, the virus began broadcasting something the hegemony had never expected to hear: humanity's story. Across 47 star systems, enslaved populations began receiving detailed accounts of the Sol System battle.
Ow.
They learned about the humans who had chosen death over slavery, about the species that had turned their entire civilization into a weapon rather than submit to conquest. More importantly, they learned that the hegemony could be defeated. The reaction was immediate and violent. On the industrial world of Nexus Station, HFY workers stopped their production lines and began sabotaging the equipment. The insectoids, with their natural hive mind coordination, were devastatingly effective when they decided to fight back. Within hours, the entire station was in chaos. Similar uprisings erupted across a dozen worlds simultaneously. The virus had not only spread humanity's story, but it also provided detailed technical specifications for improvised weapons and guerrilla tactics. Species that had been enslaved for generations suddenly had the knowledge and inspiration they needed to fight back. Captain Torres, leading a joint strike force of humans and liberated aliens, demonstrated the new reality of galactic warfare. Her mixed crew of human engineers, HFY technicians, and even a few defected Dragnari operated from a converted fit mining vessel that looked like nothing more than another piece of space junk. Their target was a hegemony supply convoy carrying weapons and equipment to reinforce their remaining fleets. The convoy was heavily escorted and following established trade routes that should have been completely secure. But Torres and her crew had been studying hegemony logistics for months, learning their schedules and identifying their weaknesses. The attack came without warning. The converted mining ship emerged from the shadow of an asteroid, its improvised weapon systems targeting the convoy's shield generators. The shield-breaker missiles, developed from Dr. Park's research, punched through the escort ship's defenses like bullets through paper. Within minutes, the convoy was defenseless. But instead of destroying the ships, Torres ordered her crew to board them. The goal wasn't just to disrupt hegemony supply lines, but to capture their technology and equipment. Each successful raid made the growing rebellion stronger and better equipped. The psychological impact was even more devastating than the material losses. Hegemony forces found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Supply convoys disappeared. Communication relays went offline. Remote outposts reported strange contacts before going silent forever. The rigid military doctrine that had made the hegemony invincible for 3 millennia became a liability against an enemy that refused to follow the rules. Their standard tactics assumed they were fighting against organized military forces with clear command, structures, and predictable strategies. The human-inspired rebellion was chaos given form, impossible to predict or counter. On Vulture Prime, Council Leader Vorthok received increasingly desperate reports from across the Empire. The rebellion was spreading faster than their forces could respond to it. Entire sectors were falling out of communication. Their most experienced commanders were requesting reinforcements that simply didn't exist. "How many systems have we lost contact with?" he asked Admiral Korath's replacement, a young officer who looked like he hadn't slept in days. 17 confirmed, sir. Another dozen are reporting significant rebel activity. The pattern is always the same. The rebellion starts with the worker populations, then spreads to include local defense forces. By the time we can respond, they've already established fortified positions and acquired our weapons. Vorthok's ancient features twisted with rage. And the source of this rebellion? The humans, sir? Somehow they've managed to coordinate resistance movements across multiple sectors simultaneously. Their virus has spread to nearly all our communication networks. We've had to resort to courier ships for secure communications, but even those are being intercepted. The council leader stared out at the swirling clouds of Vulture Prime, his empire crumbling around him. In his 800 years of rule, he had never faced a crisis like this. The humans hadn't just defeated a battle fleet. They had infected his entire empire with their insane ideology of freedom and self-determination. "Deploy the planet killer. Fleet," he ordered finally. "If we cannot rule these rebels, we'll make an example of them that will last for 1,000 generations. Destroy their homeworld. Turn Earth into a warning that no species can challenge the hegemony and survive." But even as he gave the order, Vorthok knew that it might already be too late. The rebellion had spread beyond his ability to control it. The humans had taught the galaxy something that would be impossible to forget, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that any tyrant, no matter how powerful, could be brought down by those willing to sacrifice everything for liberty. The final battle was coming, and for the first time in 3,000 years, the outcome was uncertain. The rebellion that had started as whispers in the dark corners of the galaxy now burned like wildfire across 43 star systems. What the hegemony had dismissed as isolated incidents of civil unrest had grown into a coordinated revolution that threatened the very foundation of their 3,000-year empire. The virus that Commander Williams had planted in their communication networks had done more than just spread information. It had awakened something that had been sleeping in the hearts of enslaved species across the galaxy. Hope. On the factory world of Industrial 7, the Hivert workers had transformed their manufacturing centers into weapons production facilities. The insectoid species, with their natural ability to work as a coordinated hive mind, proved devastatingly effective when they decided to fight back instead of build ships for their oppressors. Queen Mother Zik stood in the center of what had once been a hegemony weapons factory. Watching her children assemble human-designed explosive devices with the same precision they had once used to build alien war machines, the humans were right about one thing, she clicked to her lieutenant, her compound eyes reflecting the light from the assembly lines. Freedom is worth any price. We have been slaves for so long that we had forgotten what it meant to choose our own destiny. The weapons they were building were crude by hegemony standards, but they didn't need to be sophisticated. The human tactical manuals that had been broadcast along with the virus had taught them that the best weapons were often the simplest ones. Explosive charges that could be hidden in cargo containers. Mines that looked like routine maintenance equipment. Devices that could turn everyday industrial tools into instruments of war. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy.
Ow.
The mining world of Korath Prime, former slaves had seized control of the orbital platforms and were using the massive mining lasers to destroy any hegemony ship that tried to approach. The agricultural world of Green Valley had poisoned their food shipments destined for hegemony worlds, causing widespread illness among their oppressors. Even on the heavily fortified military world of Iron Fortress, the local garrison was reporting increasing incidents of sabotage and rebellion. Captain Tordes had become something of a legend among the rebel forces. Her mixed crew of humans, Havari, and even a few defected Drekneri had struck at over 20 hegemony targets in the past month, always appearing where they were least expected and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Their ship, the Freedom's Edge, looked like a battered cargo hauler from the outside, but it had been equipped with the best weapons and technology that the rebellion could provide. A target acquired, reported her tactical officer, a young Hivari named Click, who had joined the crew after his hive was liberated from hegemony control. Hegemony transport convoy, 12 ships strong, carrying weapons and supplies to the Iron Fortress garrison. Torres studied the tactical display from her position in the captain's chair. The convoy was heavily defended, with 4 escort cruisers and a full squadron of fighters. Under normal circumstances, attacking such a force would be suicide. But these were not normal circumstances. The rebellion had learned to fight in ways that the hegemony couldn't predict or counter. Position of the supply depot they're heading to, she asked. Asteroid Mining Station Alpha 7, replied her navigation officer, a human engineer named Davis who had volunteered for the mission after his family was killed in the orbital bombardment. Of Earth, it's one of their main staging areas for operations against the rebel worlds. Torres smiled grimly. The hegemony was still thinking in terms of protecting their assets and maintaining their supply lines. They hadn't yet realized that in this new kind of war, there was no such thing as a safe target or a secure position. Signal the other rebel ships in this sector, she ordered. We're going to demonstrate something that the hegemony has never seen before. We're not going to attack their convoy. We're going to destroy their depot while they're still trying to deliver supplies to it. The attack on Asteroid Mining Station Alpha 7 began with what appeared to be a routine mining operation. 3 converted cargo ships approached the station, their transponders identifying them as independent contractors delivering routine supplies. The station's defenders, focused on protecting the incoming convoy, paid little attention to the small ships requesting docking permission. By the time the hegemony garrison realized what was happening, it was too late. The cargo ships were packed not with supplies, but with explosives and volunteer assault teams. The coordinated attack destroyed the station's main power core, knocked out its communication array, and eliminated its defensive weapons in a matter of minutes. When the supply convoy finally arrived at what should have been a secure depot, they found nothing but wreckage and debris floating in space. Worse, the rebel forces had used the station's own communication equipment to broadcast a message across the entire sector before destroying it. The message was simple but devastating. Nowhere was safe from the rebellion, and no hegemony target was beyond their reach. The psychological impact of these attacks was spreading far beyond their immediate military value. Hegemony forces throughout the galaxy were beginning to question their own invincibility. Young Drachnary soldiers who had grown up hearing stories of their species' glorious conquests were now seeing their supposedly superior forces being outfought by former slaves and primitive humans. Commander Rex, a mid-level Drachnary officer, stationed on the border world of Frontier Station, stood in his quarters reading the latest intelligence reports with growing unease. The official communications from Hegemony High Command still claimed that the rebellion was under control, but the evidence suggested otherwise. 3 more star systems had fallen out of contact in the past week. Supply convoys were disappearing with increasing frequency. Most disturbing of all, defection rates among hegemony forces were climbing steadily. "Sir," came a voice from his door communicator, "you have a priority message from your brother on the homeworld." Rex activated his personal communication terminal and was surprised to see his younger brother Tam appear on the screen. Tam served in the elite hegemony guard, stationed on Volta Prime itself. If anyone would know the true situation, it would be him. "Brother," Tam said without preamble, "I'm sending you this message against regulations because I believe you deserve to know the truth. The rebellion is not under control. We've lost contact with over half our territories. The Council is preparing to deploy planet-killer weapons against Earth, but many of us believe it's already too late." Rex felt his blood turn cold. Planet-killer weapons were the hegemony's ultimate threat, devices so destructive that they were only used against worlds that posed an existential threat to the Empire. If the Council was considering their use against a primitive world like Earth, the situation was far worse than anyone was admitting. "The humans have done something that we never thought possible," Tam continued. "They've taught the galaxy that the hegemony can be defeated. Even if we destroy their homeworld, the idea will survive. Ideas, brother, are harder to kill than planets." The message ended, leaving Rex alone with his thoughts. He looked out the window of his quarters at the stars beyond, knowing that, somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing in ways that his people had never imagined. The hegemony had built their empire on the belief that superior force would always triumph over inferior technology. They had never considered the possibility that an enemy might be willing to sacrifice everything for an idea. On Earth itself, the preparations for the final battle were reaching completion. The planet's surface bore the scars of orbital bombardment, and millions of people had died in the fighting, but humanity's spirit remained unbroken. In the hidden bunkers and underground facilities, the survivors were preparing for what they knew would be the last chance to save their world. Dr. Park stood in the main command center of Luna Base 7, watching as the final components of humanity's ultimate weapon were moved into position. The planet-killer fleet that the hegemony was preparing to send would be the most powerful force ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. But humanity had spent years preparing for this moment, and they had one final surprise for their would-be conquerors. "Status report on the solar defense grid," she called to her tactical coordinator. "All systems are online and ready," came the reply. "The asteroid belt modifications are complete. The outer planet installations are operational. We have full coverage from Mercury to Pluto." Park nodded grimly. The hegemony thought they were coming to destroy a primitive world defended by the scattered remnants of a broken fleet. They had no idea that humanity had turned their entire solar system into the largest weapon ever constructed. When the planet killers arrived, they would find themselves facing not just Earth's defenders, but the combined gravitational forces of 8 planets, the asteroid belt, and every piece of space debris between Mercury and Pluto. The final battle? For the future of the galaxy was about to begin. For the first time in 3,000 years, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. The hegemony was bringing enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. But humanity was bringing something that had never been seen before in galactic warfare. An entire star system converted into a weapon, defended by a species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. The hegemony's planet-killer fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a dark tide of destruction. 412 warships materialized in perfect formation, including 7 massive dreadnoughts, each capable of reducing a continent to ash. At the center of the armada, Super Dreadnought Final Judgment stretched nearly 4 kilometers from bow to stern. Its main weapon designed to crack a planet's core and turn entire worlds into lifeless rocks floating in space. Council leader Vorthok stood on the bridge of his flagship, his ancient features twisted with cold satisfaction. This would be the end of the human rebellion, and a message to every species in the galaxy about the price of defying the hegemony. The destruction of Earth would be broadcast to every world under their control, a reminder that no amount of courage or a determination could stand against superior firepower. "Status report," he commanded, his voice echoing through the massive bridge. "All ships report ready for combat operations," replied Admiral Thane, the youngest officer ever to command a planet-killer fleet. "Sensors indicate minimal defensive presence in the system. We're detecting approximately 200 vessels, mostly concentrated around the inner planets. No significant orbital installations or defensive platforms." Vorthok nodded with grim pleasure. The humans had apparently exhausted their military capability in their earlier desperate attacks. What few ships remained were no doubt filled with terrified civilians trying to evacuate their doomed world. "Begin the advance," he ordered. "I want that planet reduced to molten slag within 6 hours. Make sure our communications teams are recording everything. The galaxy needs to see what happens to those who challenge the natural order." But deep within the asteroid belt, Admiral Beck was watching the approaching fleet with the calm focus of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The hidden command center built into the largest asteroid in the belt was invisible to hegemony sensors, protected by technology that humanity had developed specifically for this moment. Around him, thousands of human officers and volunteers prepared to execute the most audacious military operation in the history of warfare. "The enemy fleet is proceeding according to our projections," reported his tactical officer, Colonel Kim. "They're maintaining standard formation and following the most direct route toward Earth. All defensive systems are armed and ready." Beck studied the three-dimensional display that showed the entire solar system. Every asteroid in the belt had been converted into a weapon platform. The gas giants had been surrounded with hidden installations that could launch projectiles at incredible speeds. Even the small rocky planets had been equipped with mass drivers that could hurl chunks of matter at velocities. Approaching the speed of light, "Initiate Phase 1, Beck ordered. "Let's show these aliens what happens when they threaten our home." The first indication that something was wrong came when the lead elements of the hegemony fleet reached the asteroid belt. What their sensors had identified as routine mining debris suddenly came alive with energy signatures. Thousands of hidden installations activated simultaneously, turning the entire belt into a maze of weapons, platforms, and defensive positions. Sir called the sensor operator aboard the Final Judgment, his voice tight with confusion. "We're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the asteroid field. The debris is ... It's all artificial. The entire belt has been weaponized." Before Admiral Thane could respond, the first wave of human attacks began. The asteroids themselves became projectiles, launched by gravity manipulators that used the solar system's own gravitational fields as a weapon. Chunks of rock and metal the size of city blocks hurtled toward the hegemony fleet at velocities that made conventional evasion impossible. "All ships, evasive maneuvers." Thane shouted into his communicator. "The entire system is a trap." But the trap was more sophisticated than even he realized. The human engineers had spent years studying orbital mechanics and gravitational physics, learning to use the solar system itself as a weapon. Each projectile wasn't just aimed at where the enemy ships were, but at where they would be forced to go by the gravitational pulls of the planets and the sun. The hegemony fleet, designed for conventional space combat, found itself caught in a gravitational maze that forced their ships into predetermined kill zones. Their advanced shields and armor were useless against attacks that they couldn't see coming until it was too late to avoid them. The heavy cruiser Dominion's Wrath was the first major casualty. Struck by an asteroid moving at nearly 10% of light speed, the massive ship simply disintegrated, its atoms scattered across thousands of kilometers of space in a fraction of a second. Within minutes, a dozen more ships had been destroyed by impacts that no shield generator could deflect. This is impossible. Vorthok snarled, watching his carefully organized fleet dissolve into chaos. How can primitives turn an entire star system into a weapon? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Park's face appeared on the hegemony's communication screens. Broadcast from her hidden base on Earth's moon, the elderly scientist looked tired but determined as she addressed the alien fleet that had come to destroy her world. "You made the same mistake that bullies always make," she said, her voice calm despite the destruction raging around them. "You assumed that because we were smaller and weaker, we were also stupid. You never bothered to learn about us, to understand what makes humanity different from every other species you've conquered." Vorthok's eyes blazed with fury. "Silence this transmission immediately." But the human virus that had infected their communication networks made it impossible to block the signal. Park's words reached every ship in the fleet, and more importantly, they were being broadcast to every world still under hegemony control. "We're different because we don't just fight for survival," she continued. "We fight for ideas. Fight for the belief that every intelligent being has the right to choose their own destiny. And we're willing to die for that belief, not just as individuals, but as an entire species." The battle continued to rage around them as she spoke. The hegemony fleet was being systematically destroyed by weapons that shouldn't have existed, tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. But the humans weren't just trying to win a battle. They were making a statement that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Admiral Beck coordinated the final phase of the attack from his asteroid command center. The remaining hegemony ships were trapped in the inner system, caught between the gravitational pulls of Earth and Mars. Their formation had collapsed completely, and individual ships were being picked off by precisely targeted mass driver rounds. Launched from the outer planets, Final Judgment is attempting to withdraw, reported Colonel Kim. They're trying to reach the edge of the system. Beck smiled grimly. "Not today. Initiate Jupiter Protocol." The gas giant Jupiter, with its massive gravitational field and dozens of moons, had been converted into the largest weapon in human history. Hidden installations throughout the Jovian system launched a coordinated barrage that created a gravitational slingshot effect. Hurling projectiles at the fleeing super dreadnought with incredible precision, the Final Judgment, the most powerful warship ever built by the hegemony, lasted exactly 17 seconds against the combined gravitational forces of the outer solar system. The ship that had been designed to destroy planets was torn apart by the same forces that held the solar system together. Vorthok, trapped in an escape pod as his flagship disintegrated around him, watched the end of his empire with the bitter understanding of complete defeat. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had proven that the hegemony's entire philosophy was wrong. Superior technology and overwhelming force meant nothing against an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything for freedom. As the last hegemony ships burned in the cold vacuum of space, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. The rebellion had succeeded beyond humanity's wildest dreams. 43 of the hegemony's 47 systems had declared independence. Their former slaves were hunting down the remaining loyal forces with techniques learned from human military advisors. On Volta Prime itself, the crystalline towers of the Council were burning as liberated Hyvari and defected Draconary stormed the seat of galactic tyranny. The 3,000-year reign of the hegemony was ending in fire and revolution, brought down by a species that their leaders had dismissed as primitive savages. Dr. Park stood on the observation deck of Luna Base 7, watching the debris of the enemy fleet drift past Earth's moon like mechanical snowflakes. The cost had been terrible. Millions of humans had died defending their world, and the planet's surface bore scars that would take centuries to heal. But they had won something more precious than victory. They had won the right to remain free, and they had shown the galaxy that any tyrant, no matter how powerful, could be defeated by those willing to fight for liberty. 5 years later, Dr. Park stood in the same observation deck. But now it was part of humanity's first intergalactic embassy. Around her, representatives from dozens of species worked together to establish the Galactic Republic, founded on principles of freedom and self-determination that humanity had taught them to value. The hegemony's empire was gone, replaced by an alliance of free worlds that stretched across the galaxy. The former slaves had become citizens. The conquered had become allies. And the galaxy had learned that the most powerful weapon in the universe wasn't a planet killer or a super dreadnought. It was the simple human belief that freedom was worth any price. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. But it wasn't the price that the hegemony had intended. Instead of learning to fear superior force, the galaxy had learned something far more dangerous, that tyranny could be defeated, that freedom was possible, and that sometimes the smallest species could teach the largest empires the most important lessons of all. Humanity's greatest export to the galaxy wasn't technology or resources. It was hope, and the unshakable conviction that all sentient beings deserve the right to choose their own destiny among the stars.